Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Humboldt County Board of Equalization hearing for February 24th, 2022. It is 8:30 in the morning. I would like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll please join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First on our agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone in the public who would like to provide comment before we start? Not appearing that anyone is wanting to do that, so we'll move on to, I think we'll begin with introductions. If you're participating virtually and you intend to be testifying, your intention is to be testifying, I'd ask that when it's your turn to please identify yourself, state your name, your affiliation, the party that you're going to be representing. We'll start from that end down there with our Deputy District Attorney.
My name is Wendy Maddox and I'm a Deputy DA in Humboldt County.
Rich Stone, Mayor of Winnemucca and on the Board of Equalization.
Gary Begachia, Winnemucca, Board of Equalization.
My name is Ron Cherry. I'm Chairman of the Board and County Commissioner.
Mike Shepard, the Board of Equalization.
Jim Beadart, Board of Equalization.
Tammy Spiro, Humboldt County Clerk.
Andy Heiser, Humboldt County Assessor.
Is there anyone else in this audience who intends to testify?
On the phone.
Not. Those of you online, if you would please, anyone who would like to start there, please identify yourself.
Good morning. This is Jeff Durant. I will be testifying for the petitioner Battle Mountain, and I'm a authorized agent with Claremont Tax Associates.
Hi, my name is Dave Grozda. I'm with Con Edison Development representing Battle Mountain Solar. I'm the Director of Asset Management.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nathaniel Moore with Consolidated Edison, Operations and Maintenance Manager at Battle Mountain Solar.
Yeah, I'm Mark Stafford. I'm a contract appraiser for Humboldt County, and I'll be representing myself and Andy will be representing the assessor's office in this hearing.
Is there anyone else, maybe on the phone? Not appearing to be, so we'll move on to, I guess you want to do the oath right now?
Let's go to item 4 if you don't mind, and then we'll do the oath.
Okay. Discussion on review of regulations, guidelines, statutes related to the County Board of Equalization by District Attorney or Deputy District Attorney.
Wendy Maddox for purposes of the record. I want to remind you that the taxpayer has the burden to show whether property valuation should be changed. As you see from the packets that have been submitted that you've reviewed, the issues in this case are related to whether the property is real property, personal property, and more succinctly, whether this is a trade fixture or a fixture. If you turn to the respondent's packet, which is numbered, page 29 has a good, page 29, 30, and 31 have some relevant laws that are going to be applicable to this matter. And if you look specifically on page 30, Administrative Code 361.11745 talks about a trade fixture, and that is defined as an item of personal property that one is installed or attached non-permanently to real property by an owner or tenant for the purpose of conducting a business or trade and not for the enhancement of the real property to which it is installed or attached. And 2, has a unique identity and function which is related to the business or trade for which it is installed or attached and which is distinct from real property to which it is installed or attached. And you will see in petitioner's exhibit, and they touch on that test In their packet, they touch on that on pages 3 and 4, and they essentially take that test and they apply it to the facts in this case. So I just wanted to bring your attention to that, and you'll probably hear more supplemental argument today from the petitioners. Additionally, Nevada Administrative Code defines a fixture, and that is back in the respondents page 30 packet. And this administrative code is essentially a test that came out, a Supreme Court case. And so this is codified. The test is codified from the Supreme Court case. But essentially, if you look at 361.1127, fixture defined, I'm not going to read it all for you because I know that you can all read that. But it's really about three things. It's a three-prong test. And you'll see that I've given all of you a printout that's stapled of loose paper. And it is an AG opinion 2012-10, and that's included in respondents' exhibits. But I took the test out of that AG opinion, so you had it kind of in front of you and you could look at it. It's a case-by-case basis pursuant to a reasonable person standard. There's a three-part test of annexation, adaption, and intent for the fixture test. The three-prong test, the intent of the parties is typically given the most weight. And this printout talks about, from that AG opinion, physical annexation, which is actual or constructive annexation through attachment or immovability of the property, whether the item is permanently installed and cannot be removed without substantial damage to the item or the land, regardless of contractual obligations. You'll see under that there's kind of an example. And if you flip the page, they then talk about the adaption test, which again is codified in Nevada Administrative Code 361.1127. And that test is satisfied when the object in question is adapted to the use to which the real property is devoted. And it talks about where the purpose of an item not physically annexed to the land is necessary, integral, or a working part, designed or committed for use, or so essential to the land or improvement that the land or improvement cannot perform its desired function without the non-attached item. The final prong of that fixture test evaluates the intention of the parties, whether a reasonable person intended the item to be a permanent part of the land or an improvement thereto, taking into account annexation, adaption, and other objective manifestations of permanence. And so that's for you to review. You also have this AG opinions and respondents packet references an AG opinion in that decision, opinion number 2004. So I printed out the application of 361.227 in this case, and this was a mining case, and the improvement to real properties are being used by the mining operator as improvements to real property and thus must be valued as such in accordance with 361.227. Reclamation obligations do not change the actual intervening use of the improvements to the real property for that tax year, even though at some time in the future such improvements will be demolished and removed. Thus, to the extent that the dismantling or other activities are to occur within that tax year, the property in question should be considered personal property for that entire year. To read the express language of NRS 361.053 is to allow taxpayer to alter the legal status of property, even though the taxpayer's use of that property may not change for many years in the future, directly contradicts the specific charge to the assessor in NRS 361.7 to value improved land consistently to the use that improved land is being put to. So I've given you a lot of law. You have it printed out for you. And the reason why I wanted to focus that was that so you could understand that the central issue in this case, there's some other minor issues they'll go into, but you're going to need to make in your motion some specific findings. And it's important that whatever decision you make is protected with findings. If you don't protect your decision with findings and it's appealed up to to the State Board of Equalization, if you don't have any findings, it's pretty easy for them to overturn your decision. So I would just ask for you to protect your findings in the sense that if you decide that the taxpayer has presented sufficient evidence, I'm going to need you to put in your motion the findings as to why this is a trade fixture. And if you decide that the taxpayer has not presented sufficient evidence to meet their burden, I'm going to need you to state findings that indicate why you believe this to be a fixture.
Wendy, can I ask? The one you just read, My understanding that in the case of the mining company is that I don't know if they were talking about their buildings or foundations or whatever, but what they're saying here is it is real property, and at the point of reclamation, it goes away. So even though it's going to go away in the future, it was real property while it was being utilized that way.
That's essentially what they found in that AG opinion. And I included the question. I have the entire opinion if you'd like to look at it.
Oh, that'd be
Okay.
too much for me. I'm trying to simplify it.
Yeah.
Uh,
But it seems to, the intervening use, do not change the actual intervening use of the improvements to the real property for the tax year, even though at some time in the future, such improvements will be demolished and removed. So that opinion had to do with a reclamation provision that required, I think it was either a federal statute that required for the items to be removed. So that was based on that issue, but essentially the property was valued as real property, even though in the future it was going to be removed.
Any other questions for Wendy? Any questions out in the audience for Wendy? Hearing none? We'll move on then to item 5, which is oath administered by district attorney or deputy district attorney to all persons that will be offering testimony to the board. So
I would request all witnesses who will testify in the room to stand. If you're on the computer, just go ahead and raise your right hand, but if you'd please stand and raise your right hand if you're in the room. Do each of you swear or affirm the testimony you will give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
If I could get, some of you are on mute, so let me go ahead and get everybody's verbal response to that. Mr. Durant?
I do.
And
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
I do.
And Mr. Stafford?
I do.
Thank you.
that we'll move on into the hearing phase. Hearing, discussion, and possible action on the following petition for review of assessed valuation. HCB 2022-01, Battle Mountain Solar Project LLC, assessors parcel numbers 07, excuse me, 07-0471-13 and 07-0471-24 at 31400 Bluefax Road, Valmy, Nevada, year and roll type of assessment being appealed. 2021-22 supplemental roll from the action of the Humboldt County assessor. This is for discussion and possible action. So I think we'll begin with, if anybody has any opening statements, you're welcome to do that at this time. And then we'll roll right into the petitioner or his representative may proceed with his or her evidence and testimony.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a statement?
Yes, sir.
For the record, Mike Shepard. I'm employed by Michael Clay Corporation. And I brought up at our last meeting the fact that our company constructed the operation and maintenance building out at the solar plant. And following that, Wendy sent over information relating to whether there was a conflict of any sort. We were employed by a company called Mir Energy, which is not involved in this petition. And noting in this petition that a taxpayer issue on the classification, the solar power generating facility property, excluding the O&M building and surface improvements. So fact number one is the building we built is not related to this petition. Fact number two is the outcome of this hearing will have no effect whatsoever on me personally or the company I work for. So with that, I feel that I can participate in this.
Okay. Thank you. So as I stated earlier, we'll begin with the petitioner. Whoever from the Battle Mountain Solar Project that would like to start off here, please, at the beginning, please state your name again.
Hi, my name is Jeff Durant, and good morning to everybody. I am president of Claremont Tax Associates, located in Claremont, California. I'm a property tax agent to Battle Mountain Solar Project and Con Edison Development. I've represented many energy companies since 1984, including solar, geothermal, cogeneration, and biomass power plants, plus many different projects in oil and gas production, midstream oil pipelines, oil and food oils terminals. I've also represented rare earth mines, gold mines, and lithium extraction projects. I have worked in local and state assessment issues in Nevada since 1996. The project we are discussing today is a large-scale solar generating facility with battery storage. It was completed just before the lien date in June of 2021 and is online and operating now. The construction took less than 1 year, so this is the first year of assessment. There were some issues with us getting the final accounting work done to provide cost details to the assessor, but I believe those are all worked out. Unfortunately, we were left without time to discuss assessment issues with the assessor. As you have probably read in our application and our brief, we have 3 assessment issues. First, we believe that most of this electric generating plant should be classified as a trade fixture and assessed as personal property. Second, we believe that as personal property, the taxes paid on the solar panels should not be included in the determination of costs. Third, we also believe that the replacement cost approach for trade fixtures should be adjusted for federal investment tax credits. So beginning with the first issue of whether this should be a trade fixture or most of it should be a trade fixture. Whether physically installed personal property is a trade fixture is determined by the facts and the circumstances of the installation and the intended use. That means that we have to look at whether the installed personal property meets the definition of a trade fixture and whether or not it meets the traditional fixture tests, the 3 tests already mentioned. First, is it physically attached to the land or an improvement? Second, is the use or purpose of the personal property a necessary part of the land and improvement? And third, is the attachment to land or an improvement intended to be permanent? On the last test, if the personal property can be removed without destroying either the personal property or the land or improvement, it is not permanent. Trade fixtures are defined as personal property which is non-permanently installed for the purpose of conducting a business and not for the enhancement of a real property to which it is installed or attached. Trade fixtures have a function that is related to the business for which they are installed. Trade fixtures are not installed to enhance a building or land. If they are, then they are fixtures. They are only installed to support the operation of a business. This solar generation project is a business, and the panels, battery storage, and equipment are only there to be able to operate that business. By trade fixture, we are not referring in our application to the operations and maintenance building, nor to the other land improvements, which are mostly roads and walls. We are referring to the operating equipment of solar panels and battery storage units installed on piers, driven into the ground to keep the panels in proper position and to hold the battery equipment. We are also referring to the wire connections and components used to transmit the power to a transformer for further transmitting the power to Nevada Energy substation for ownership, transfer, and income. This project fits the definition of a trade fixture. A further look at the fixture tests will also support that this project is not a fixture. The first test is whether the personal property is, in this case, resting permanently on the land. The project that we are talking about, the portion of the project is all outside. It is not installed inside of any building or other structural improvement. The solar panels are mounted on tubing with motor gear drives to position them in relation to the sun. The panel assemblies and tubing are attached to galvanized pier supports driven into the soil by a machine. The pier supports can be removed without altering the land. The pier support could also be used again once it is removed. The panel assemblies can be replaced and most likely will be over the life of the project as maintenance and repairs are required. The battery storage is also installed on piers. The collector substation and step-up transfer are all on easily removable concrete skids, which could be removed without altering the land. The parts of the project can be upgraded or replaced. These parts of the project, the substation, transformer, and the other things that are on concrete skids, could also be upgraded at some point during this without harming any of the land as needed over the life of the project. The second test is whether the personal property is adapted to the land. In this case, the equipment is delivered as a kit from Next Tracker, the company that manufactures the whole system that holds the solar panels. It has been installed as delivered. Modifications are not necessary to connect the equipment. The installation does not enhance the land. The third test is whether the personal property is so placed or installed as to be there permanently or is essential to the land or an improvement and cannot be removed without causing damage to the personal property itself or to the land or improvement. In this case, the solar equipment, battery storage, and other equipment can all be removed with no damage to them or to the land on which they have been placed. In fact, the equipment can be replaced, and there is an expectation that many parts will be replaced as maintenance and repairs are required over the life of the project. The conclusion of this three-part analysis is that the operating equipment of solar panels, battery storage equipment, the wire connection components used to transmit the power, and transformer equipment are all trade fixtures and should be assessed as personal property. We believe that it should be classified as personal property for assessment with an expected economic life of 30 years, with consideration for all forms of depreciation and for the historically decreasing manufacturing cost of photovoltaic generation equipment. And that's the first issue. I could stop for questions, or I could move on to the second issue. I'll move on to the second issue. The second issue we are raising is the inclusion of sales taxes paid on the solar panels in the assessment. Battle Mountain is the original builder of the project, and its costs are the acquisition costs. To avoid double taxation, the instructions for reporting personal property costs say not to include sales taxes paid in reported costs. According to the 2021-22 Personal Property Manual, acquisition cost includes any expense required to place the asset in service except sales tax, and that's on page Roman numeral 4 of that manual. As personal property, the amount of $1,042,420 paid for sales taxes on the solar panels, which can be seen in our Exhibit 3, should not be included in the project acquisition cost. And that's the second issue we have. The third issue we are raising is that replacement cost, which is the approach being used, should be the costs net of federal investment tax credits. The replacement cost approach is based upon the principle of substitution, in which the value of property tends to be set by the cost of acquiring equally desirable and valuable substitute property. A buyer would pay no more for a new facility than it would cost to build a facility of the same utility. The administrative code at 361.372 defines replacement cost as the cost of acquiring or constructing at current prices a property which is the functional equivalent of an existing property. The assessor's assessment assumes properly that the cost of this newly completed project is the starting point for valuation. A newly completed project does not have any depreciation to consider. However, when looked at from the principle of substitution for evaluation, the assessor has not considered the true economic costs of the project or what a buyer would consider in acquiring or constructing a project of similar utility. For Battle Mountain Solar and all solar facilities in the United States, the federal investment tax credit is an integral part of the final net cost analysis and must be considered if a market rate of return can be achieved by the investor. To not use these net costs is to assume that a buyer would consider a below market return on investment on a solar generation project. It would also violate the principle that taxable value of any property must not exceed full cash value. And that's at 361.277 in the statutes. Full cash value is the most probable price which a property would bring in a competitive and open market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale. and that's at the statutes, chapter 361.025. The replacement cost for Battle Mountain Solar Project as of July 1, 2021 is the total expenditures to build it net of a 30% investment tax credit that the project has. So in summary, I would like to go over our exhibits. And first of all, our exhibit number 2. Which is going to be sorry for the delay here. Exhibit number 2 is going to be at roughly page 28 of the hearing packet. And this is a summary of the assessor's taxable and assessed values on one side, and our opinion of the recommended values on the other, on the right side.
Sorry, we're trying to navigate to that.
That's okay. I'll go slow.
That's part of that section, yes.
Right there. Or is he starting now?
So it's called Exhibit 2.
Yeah.
And that's where they're marked by me. This was part of his
Multiple
original.
pages.
Yeah.
Okay, starting with the petition.
Okay. I think we're on track.
You're on Exhibit 2.
Yes.
So on the left side is the assessments, the taxable value and the assessed value. And on the right side is our recommended opinion of value for taxable value and assessed value, based upon the 3 issues which I've discussed. So our recommended conclusion is that the taxable value, the total of both parcels, be adjusted to $108,349,133, which is $1,195,922 of personal property, $105,286,466 of trade fixtures, and $1,866,746 of improvements. We move on to Exhibit 3. This is a breakdown of the costs to construct, which I believe the assessor has also in their exhibits. There were some slight accounting adjustments at the bottom on their exhibit, but this is the amount that I believe the assessor was using when he did his assessment for the total. There are 160 million at the bottom. The important thing I want to point out here is the asset, about the 5th asset down is the sales tax paid on solar panels, and that amount is $1,042,420. That is the amount that in our second issue we feel should be deducted from the replacement costs. And then Exhibit 4 is a 2-page exhibit. This is a spreadsheet, and we're going step by step from the assessment for the adjustments that we are recommending. So on the first page, you can see we are adjusting for the sales tax of $1,042,000. And as you move to the second page, you can see we have the adjusted costs where the sales tax is now under the excluded costs. And we're moving forward across the page. We have a total cost and then an adjustment for investment tax credit, which is 30% of trade fixture costs. It's interesting to note that if an item is considered an improvement under the Internal Revenue Code, it is not available for investment tax credit. However, if it is personal property or trade fixture, it is available for investment tax credit. And then the final column out there, you can see we have our recommended classification. And then down at the bottom there, you can see the numbers that we recommended. Again, the 1,195,000, the 105 million, and the 1.8 million. This morning, or yesterday, I got a couple more pictures, or a couple of pictures that I think would also be helpful for the board to see what we are talking about when we're talking about the piers that the solar arrays are connected to that support them. And I'd like to offer in what is being numbered as Exhibit 5 and Exhibit 6, which are pictures, one of a machine installing one of the piers. Now that machine is just a picture, but it's actually kind of using a vibrating pushing motion to just insert the pier into the soil. And the other picture in those exhibits is a close-up of the actual installed piers at Battle Mountain Solar. So you can see there's no concrete involved. It's simply pushed into the soil deep enough to provide the stability needed for the arrays to be positioned where they can track the sun.
You stated
So,
that those were exhibits 5 and 6?
5,
4 and 5.
Or 4 and 5, correct?
Well,
4 and 5 for theirs, 5.
yeah, I duplicated. This is my fault.
Yeah, it's 5 and 6.
As Tammy can say, I've completely blown the number, the lettering and numbering of exhibits.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that the record is correct on this. So, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So that basically concludes my presentation. I would say that any questions you have, we have Mr. Dave Grozda, who is the Director of Asset Management for the company and the parent company, has great knowledge of the project development. And we also have Nate Moore, who is Operations and Maintenance Manager for the Battle Mountain Solar Project. So if you have like a specific question about things related, all three of us can try to respond at this point.
Anybody, board members, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Shepard. A question I have probably for David. And it relates to your lease. I noticed your lease arrangement isn't one of your exhibits. And so in this discussion, whether this is a permanent facility or, you know, in your exhibits, this has a particular lease life that's called out in here.
Yeah, I think
What
that
is, what happens at the end of the agreement that you have?
so our project. Thank you for the question. Nice to be here this morning. The question of the life of the project is one that's generally based off of the contract that we have to sell energy. That contract is a 25-year contract with NB Energy. The life of these projects typically extends beyond the contract life, potentially, another 5 years or so. Our lease is, I don't have the specific term of when that ends, but is generally tied to the end of that 30-year period, with an option to extend if the project were to be reconstructed with newer technology at the time and a new contract were to be put in place. But generally, it's the lease and the life of the project are generally timed to coincide with the life of the contract that supports it.
Your lease is with a particular company and your agreement is with Nevada Energy, two separate entities. Some of these criterias in the NAC relate to that. Really, the number 27 is the one that discusses that, but you're utilizing 361-11745, so possibly it doesn't relate. Thank you. I have the answer.
This is Commissioner Ron Cherry. I have passed that installation, that project many times during its construction. I did, one of the determinations of whether it is personal property or real property is whether or not upon removal there is, a significant alteration or destruction of the property. I did see while its construction was going on that there was at that time significant alteration to the property. There were months of heavy equipment leveling the property and making the roads and all that stuff, kind of thing. So how does that, in what way would that figure into the determination? Maybe the removal portion would not create the alteration or destruction, but the construction phase did a significant amount of alteration to the land.
So I'll respond. I believe probably what you are probably seeing there is the construction of the roads and the making sure that a fence can be put around the project and the construction of a substation, a brand new substation for Nevada Energy. There was a lot of this equipment. We aren't really talking about that. We have excluded the roads assessment and the fence assessment and the big O&M building and other little structures around it from our contention that the majority of this is trade fixture. So yes, there was a lot of activity to build it, but I don't think that the adaptation of the land has that much effect on the ability to install the piers and then the solar array equipment and the battery storage. David has another take on that.
No, I would echo those comments, and I would also add in something that I think Jeff had touched on, that just to mention further, is that the most significant component of value out there at the site are the solar panels that are attached on top of these. And while all 350,000 of them over time are going to degrade to some degree and likely be replaced, there'll be a number of the permanence of those panels is not expected to make it to the life. So I would expect that we'll be replacing a number of those over years too, if that goes to the permanence question.
Okay.
For the record, Mike Shepard. David, back to the lease. The solar panels, I understand, degrade. You'll probably be replacing them. But this issue of whether these remain attached to the land would come into play with your agreement. At the end of your agreement, if it is not renewed, your lease with the Nevada land, I don't remember the name of the holder of the property, it must stipulate that you remove this stuff or you leave it there. Most leasing type real estate transactions, this one's a little different than a building or improvements within a building, but there must be some statement about that that would be significant to the case you're putting forward. It would be unusual, it would seem to me, that at the end of the lease, if this facility was not going to continue to operate, that you would walk away and all of this equipment is simply left there. And if your lease stipulates that you have to remove all of these trade fixtures, and the trade fixtures as classified by your company and your expert are from the solar panels through the support system to the structural pier, which is a piece of steel. It must stipulate that you're removing those. If it does stipulate that, it would be indicative of what you're putting forth in your petition.
What you're saying is correct. And I think the supporting language, if helpful in this, we do have that restoration obligation at the end of the lease. And that is correct. And I think every solar and wind project that I've seen in whichever state we've worked in has similar obligations for restoring the land to its original condition as much as practical. So that's correct. There is a restoration obligation.
Nate, did you have? I'm sorry.
That's supportive of what you're saying. With respect to Chairman Cherry's observations, that property was graded and base was installed on the property. And if at the end of your agreements that you presently have, everything were removed from there, it could all be easily unbolted, trucked away, removing your pier, which is a piece of steel driven by the machine in your exhibit. At that point, somebody'd run a blade over the ground. The ground would not be harmed. The real estate would not be diminished in any way that I can imagine. So if you hold it away and your lease says you restore it, if you left at that point, then you would simply have a piece of ground that formerly had brush and now has base, if I understand it correctly.
I believe you're correct. I think maybe Nate could answer some of this question about how much the land was changed for the solar array installation.
Yeah, if I may, Jeff. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. So just to clarify, when during construction of the new plants, traditionally, yes, they're leveled and graded, but that's no longer the process for our new equipment. As Dave referenced earlier, the equipment's always evolving. We're kind of changing with it. So the land is essentially grubbed, not graded. Basically, we mow down the brush. We do not alter the terrain. We actually contour to it. So rather than having to, if it rains, we don't have to build up damming areas to protect the plant, right? We just accept that that's going to happen. So the only leveling that would have taken place would have been on the roads for the access road to the Isenhood switchyard on that. And the piers, I mean, they're really not any different than you would use on like signage. And then most of our equipment is put in a shipping container on top of those piers. So essentially, it's a big Lego kit. We put it together. We can take it apart and put it back together depending on if something breaks. But it's all meant to be put on and taken off.
Thank you. Any other?
If I can just make one more comment on the question of requirement to removal at the end of the lease. I believe there is, and we could certainly double check that for you, that part of the lease agreement says, you will, return the property in a somewhat unused or return to normal condition with all things removed. But as I understand it, the agreement to remove it is a supportive, I believe that's what you said, is a supportive issue, but not a necessary issue for it to be a trade fixture.
Questions?
Just a question.
Please, say your
Gary
name.
Bengachip. When the beginning of this project and it started up, usually I believe in mining, or I know a lot of other projects, a plan of reclamation has to be presented right at the beginning, and it's altered and changed as you go along. Has there been any plan of reclamation actually filed at the beginning of this project, or this is something that we're going to wait 30 years and see what we need to do?
I don't have the answer to that. I can follow up with that question with our development team. There's no plan that I'm aware of at this point. Nate, is there anything that you're aware of that?
There were reclamation activities at the end of construction. For instance, we had a laydown yard that was hydro seeded. It's currently growing. We put that area that was grubbed and used for storage of the materials during construction. That's been hydro seeded and placed back to its original.
I believe also over the life of these projects, there are accrued asset retirement liabilities, or those types of things are accrued into the accounting out of as expense each year and built up as kind of a sinking fund to retire the asset so that the funds are there at the end of the project.
That's correct.
I'm Mike Shepard, for the record. Jeffrey, you asked a question a minute ago, responding to my question about if the issues of the lease and reclamation and removal was supportive or sort of a cardinal importance to the question. The reason I asked the question is some of this language in the state's cases they refer to makes reference to those end dates and, end dates in the mining cases and those, and that's the reason I asked the question. It probably has some limited relevance to it. I don't think it changes the fact that, from my perspective, the piers that you have here are your attachment to the land. The rails that support it, the solar panels, they have no attachment to the land. You have piers, the piers are the element that connects this to the land. So those piers are sort of critical. It seems quite obvious those piers are simply driven, can be removed quite easily. So that's probably the cardinal importance.
My understanding is that they could be reused. I think there's a surplus on the market now for those piers, but if there were ever a shortage and a project was being removed somewhere, the piers could potentially be regalvanized and used in another project. So,
with the escalating price of steel, you have value there.
There might be.
Is there any other questions from the board? Not appearing that we have any other additional questions.
Chairman Cherry,
Yes.
prior to moving on, do you mind if I ask the petitioners about their exhibits, if they're ready to admit those exhibits?
Okay, please do.
Thank you. Mr. Durant?
Yes.
Let me just go over your exhibits with you. I see that Exhibit 1 is 7 pages that our clerk has marked. It's a review of petition, starts out with procedural background, looks to be typed. Then there's Exhibit 2, which is taxable and assessed value, labeled Exhibit A by petitioner, that's 1 page. Exhibit 3 is fixed asset listing, labeled Exhibit B by petitioner, that's 1 page. Exhibit 4 is 2021, 2022 taxpayer opinion of value, that's 2 pages. And then Exhibit 5 is a picture that you had marked as Exhibit 4. And then and the pictures of a piece of equipment, a steel post and a man. And then Exhibit 6 is another picture that you've marked as Exhibit 5. Are those all of your exhibits that you wish to offer?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And Mr. Heiser.
Let me just clarify one thing. Is the actual application we filed part of the record?
It's not, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
It's when you receive the hard copy, or I believe Mr. Grasto received the emailed version, it is not marked as an exhibit, but it is within the first tab, I believe it is.
Thank you very much.
Do you want that marked as an exhibit?
No, I just want to make sure it's part of the record also.
Okay. And then if I may, I know that you're offering those at this time to Mr. Stafford and Mr. Heiser. Do you have any objection to these exhibits? I understand that you have differing points of view, but just to the exhibits, do you have any objection to them?
No, I don't. Andy Heiser, Humboldt County Assessor.
Thank you. And so I would ask if the board would entertain a motion to admit petitioners exhibits 1 through and including 6.
I'll make the motion to accept the petitioner's exhibits 1 through 6 as presented.
Second it.
Okay. Motion has been made and seconded to include the exhibits presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Are we ready to move on to, okay. Now we'll move on to the respondent or his or her representative may proceed with his or her evidence and testimony. That would be you, Andy. So you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Mark Stafford for Humboldt County. I apologize for not being there in person. I fully intended to be there, but I am stranded in Dallas with I think there's been 1,000 flight cancellations. So I'm in a La Quinta hotel in Dallas area right now. So I'm going to try and work through this and as best I can I think we can do it. So thank you. First, I draw your attention to Assessor's Exhibit A and my page 1 of 48. This is essentially just my cover sheet, giving you an overview of the property and the value. And you'll see that we have a total taxable value for the 21-22 supplemental roll of initially a gross taxable value, 157,755,319. And you see that in upper right center, if you will, of that cover page. And then there's an abatement of 55% to the property value that's granted by the Governor's Office of Energy of 86,765,425, and the result is a net taxable value of 70,989,894. And I point this out in that if the board finds sufficient evidence to make an adjustment, that you're going to have to express, the gross value, and then the abatement would change, and the net value would change. So I just want to point that out at this time. If you turn to my page 3, you can see my valuation that I've done on the property, which is adjusting some of the costs that have been reported by the taxpayer. In the lower left quadrant there, you can see certain items excluded from the improvement value, such as the site prep and enhancements of $2 million, acquisition costs of the project. There's some title related issues that are excluded. But again, and then if you look at the upper right quadrant, you can see that I've moved over these costs. And because this is a brand new property, there is no trending or indexing of those costs. It's just the cost for that year because that's when it was completed in 2021. There's no depreciation. So at this point in time, if you're talking about classifying certain components, a real and personal property, for this rule, it really doesn't matter except the sales tax, which I'm going to get to a statute that speaks to that. So that's my calculations. Basically, I'm not going to go into depth into them at all, but that's what they are, just for your edification. And then the next page, page 4, you can see what we've done when we've added this supplemental value. Parcel 13 and parcel 24. That's a breakdown of the values for each parcel. So again, recognizing we're talking about 2 parcels here, and there is a breakdown of value there for those 2 parcels. And then you can see the value that was added to the supplemental roll. And there's a statute that speaks to that I'm going to just briefly address. On page 6 of my presentation, you can see, I don't have to orientate the board as the project. Everyone knows where this project is. Here's an aerial view of it. You can see that the main section encompasses an entire section, excepting the lower left-hand corner there, where that was broken out. And that is now deeded to NV Energy. That's on the utility side of this project. And that's where the power is distributed, by NV Energy, their facilities. A location map, parcel map. If you turn to page 10, if you would please, of my packet, calling these foundations piers is not correct. I reviewed the plans for this property, and these are called piling foundations. And that's what they are, piling foundations. Piers are something you buy at Home Depot. Those little 8x8 concrete block things with a piece of 2x4 on top where you build your deck with. That's a pier. These are piling foundations, and these steel rods are driven into the ground, structural steel driven into the ground. And here are the depths you can see of some of what the minimum embedment of the piling foundations. You can see 7.5 feet, 8 feet, 8.5 feet. So these are permanently embedded in the ground, attached to the ground. And so these are piling foundations. They are not piers. And I'll move on to, I'm going to move right to the crux of the matter here, which is your page 29, or my page 29. I'm sorry, I don't know what the page is for you are looking at, but the assessor's page 29. All right. And look at NRS 361-260, that there's if you want to call it that, on the unsecured roll, and an improvement of unreal property in existence on July 1, whose existence was not ascertained in time to be placed on the secured roll for that text here, and which is not governed by subsection 4, must be placed on the unsecured roll, and that's what we did. Okay. And then the next statute just speaks to why this property is locally assessed instead of centrally assessed. And that's because it lies entirely within Humboldt County. It's not property of interstate nature. And then if you turn to page 30, NAC 361-1117 talks about the cost of replacement. Cost of replacement means the total cost of construction required to replace an improvement with a substitute or of like or equal utility using current standards of materials and design, including the cost of any permanent labor, materials, supervision, contractor's profit and overhead, architect plans and specifications, sales tax, and insurance. So there's 2 takeaways for me from here. One is the mention of sales taxes included in replacement costs. The other is there's no mention here of excluding any federal tax credits from the U.S. government from that calculation. There's nothing in statute or regulation that instructs the assessor to make such an adjustment. And with regard to that comment of the 30% tax credit, I would ask, does the taxpayer make an adjustment on their balance sheet for their assets? Have they deducted the 30% from their balance sheet for these assets? I'm sure the answer to that is no. The next statute is, or the next regulation, NAC 361.11745, a trade fixture defined. Now, as a background, I'll tell you, I attended all the work that developed these regulations, the trade fixture and the fixture regulations. So I was intimately involved with what the creation of these regulations, what they mean, what they were intended for. And this is, trade fixture means an item of personal property that is installed or attached non-permanently to real property by an owner or tenant for the purpose of conducting a business or trade, and not for the enhancement of the real property to which it is installed or attached. So what does that mean? That means a tenant moves into a building, he has active machinery that he needs to attach to the building. So the building, he might even install a pier there to it and bolt it to the ground. And he's also going to put a sign out in the front with signage advertising his business. Now, these are possessions of the tenant. They're meant to enhance his business. They're not meant to enhance the property value. A buyer of this property would not expect these enhancements to be transferred in sale. If I bought a car wash, I would expect that the car wash equipment is transferred with it. So that doesn't meet the definition of this trade fixture. If we look at NAC 361.1127, a fixture means an item other than a trade fixture that was originally personal property, which has been installed or attached to land or an improvement in a permanent manner. Also used in this section, installed or attached to land and improvement in a permanent manner means that one, either, so it's either A or B. So if we look at B, the use or purpose of an item that is not otherwise physically annexed to land or an improvement is so adapted that it is, one, a necessary, integral, or working part of the land or improvement. Two, designed or committed for use with the land or improvement. Or three, so essential to the land or improvement that the land or improvement cannot perform its desired function without the non-attached item. All three of those tests are met with the subject property. To talk about the panels as not being a necessary, integral, or working part of the land improvement would be a false statement. To say that it's not, that these panels are not designed or committed for use with the land or improvement would be a false statement. To say that these panels are not essential to the land improvement where it cannot perform its desired function without the item, that would also be a false statement. So all the parameters are met here that this is a fixture. And then two, a reasonable person would consider the item to be a permanent part of the land or improvement, taking into account annexation, adaptation, or other objective manifestations of permanence, including without limitation whether, so it's or again. B, the historic use of the item indicates an intention to leave the item in place. D, ownership of the item would be conveyed with the transfer of the real property to which is it installed or attached. If I were to buy this solar power plant, would I expect these items to be transferred with the sale? Yes, the answer is yes. I would expect the panels to be transferred. I would expect the inverters to be transferred. I would expect the battery storage equipment to be transferred as well. And then on page 35, actually, I'm going to jump to, this is the Attorney General's opinion that Wendy spoke briefly on the onset of the hearing. So I turn to page 37. Question 2. What is the appropriate test in Nevada determining whether property or equipment has become a fixture under NRS Chapter 361? And I turn to the next page on 38. Fixtures are defined by regulation as improvements. The three-pronged test, physical annexation of the property. It is physically attached to the property. Constructive annexation or adaptation, yes, it's intended to be used with the property. And that's the third test, intent of the property, parties that installed it. And the paragraph, lower paragraph there on page 38. Physical annexation is demonstrated by actual or constructive annexation through attachment or even movability of the property. In determining whether property has been physically attached, courts evaluate whether the item is permanently installed and cannot be removed without substantial damage to the item or the land, regardless of the contractual obligations between the parties. So regardless of the contractual obligations between the parties, that speaks to the lease. And I turn to page 39. Movability is another factor to consider when evaluating annexation. Because the equipment at issue is movable, it was not considered to be a fixture. Okay, that's a different item. However, mobility alone is not determinative. It was determined that even though the structure in question could be moved, it was designed to remain permanently in place. The adaptation test is satisfied when the object in question is adapted to the use to which the real property is devoted. And that is certainly the case here. These items are adapted to the use to which the real property is devoted, which is a solar power generating facility. And then it talks about this item is physically annexed. So it is so essential to the land or improvement that the land or improvement cannot perform its desired function without the non-attached item. And that is true. It can't perform the function as a solar power plant without solar panels. Then the fixture is said to be installed or attached to the land or an improvement in a permanent manner. So conclusion to question 2, the test in Nevada to determine whether property is a fixture is a facts and circumstance test. The 3-pronged test originally announced in Fondren and set out in regulation remains valid. In the broadest terms, where it can be demonstrated that a reasonable person would consider the property to be physically annexed to the land, adapted to a use specific to the real property, or intended to be permanently affixed to the real property, such item would be considered a fixture. And that is opposed to a trade fixture that is not intended to enhance the real property. It's not intended to be transferred with real property. It is not intended to enhance the landlord's property. So unless someone was buying the business, then it might be included. I have to go back here to my presentation. I only have one screen. So anyway, I've kind of just highlighted everything here. There are short-lived items in a property. We see that in a residence. Hot water heaters and furnaces have to be removed periodically to be replaced. That doesn't make them personal property. The intent of the installer was to make them part of the real property and transfer with the real property. So it might, what I read here with the Nevada Administrative Code and also the Attorney General's opinion cited, these are fixtures and therefore should be valued as fixtures pursuant to NRS 361.227. I think all I have, I'd be more than happy to answer questions of the board.
Anything else from assessor side that would like to present?
Not, excuse me, not at this time. Thank you.
Madam,
Yes, I wanted to speak to Wendy Maddox for purposes of the record. Can I speak to just one area of law, please?
please do.
I think that there's been some questions in regard to reclamation or some kind of duty in the lease to remove the property. And I want to point you back to that mining opinion, which is actually referenced in the packet the respondents sent you. And so let me just scroll to that page. If you look on page 36, when you're reviewing the AG opinion that's attached, it says the facts underlying this question with regard to energy producers are similar to the same question posed with regard to mining operations. The question was previously addressed by the Attorney General opinion 2004 with regard to mining facilities, and the conclusions and determinations stated therein are applicable to energy production facilities. I pulled up that opinion, and you should have portions of it, but essentially, in that opinion, it said that in regard to the mining business, the statutory reclamation obligations, just like reclamation obligations that may be in a lease, Do not change the actual intervening use of the improvements to the real property for that tax year, even though at some time in the future, such improvements will be demolished and removed as part of the reclamation plan.
Mike Shepard, for the record. I understand what they're saying there, Wendy. One of the things that I'm a little challenged with respect to mining facilities. We have had hearings in previous years related to mining facilities. And the nature of a mining plant site, these opinions, there's a fairly significant difference in the type of improvements. In this facility, the only improvement that has a similarity to a mine plant site and process site is that there's a building here that we're not even talking about. And mining companies have a lot of personal property and they have a lot of buildings. And what's unique about a mine as compared to other real estate is typically at the end of a mine life, everything is gone and there's just earth there. And that isn't typical in real estate. So that is one thing that as we motor through this in this reasonable person thing that I'm still thinking about. But I understand what you're saying because we have this petition before us that we, the board, as reasonable people, are attempting to come to a conclusion that is reasonable. And yet there are these statutory issues and sometimes mostly reinforced by these court cases. So I appreciate what you said, but that comment for the record. If I may, Mr. Chairman, for Mark, and I see that Mark just dodged off screen for a moment. Mark, there's a couple of things.
You're muted, Mark.
I say my checkout time is in about 13 minutes. I was packing my bag over there and listening. I was listening. Go ahead, please.
You can, the additional cost of your room for the day, you can bill that to Andy, Mark.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So the first thing I noted in your testimony was you're referring to the support system as a pile. And I believe they are referring to it as a pier.
Yeah, I stated that when I reviewed the plans for the property, they were referred to as a piling foundation, which as the photo that was provided, they're driven into the ground, a piling. That is what a piling foundation is. It's driven into the ground.
So here is my question or concern about that sort of a reference. So a piling is in some circumstances with buildings, a piling is typically used under a concrete foundation where the subsoils will not sufficiently support them. So typically where there's a building or something, a pile is an underlying support to a foundation. The other cases where a pile is used is occasionally they retain something. So really the crux of this particular petition falls in how we distinguish these particular piers. So let me just, Jeff's raising his hand, so you want to
You're
interject?
speaking to me, so I'd like to respond to that first. There's also the discussion of constructive adaptation or annexation. I do not agree with the determination that it all comes down to this piling foundation. I disagree with that because it could be sitting, you notice some of the language in the AGO, the Attorney General's opinion, spoke to items that were simply resting there. They weren't even attached. They were just at the property. So therefore were constructively annexed to the property. And I'd give an example as a storage shed at a residence. It's sitting on skids, right? But the owner has put a walkway to the front door. He's put power up inside the shed so you can turn the light on when you go inside. There's landscaping around this storage shed. He has constructively annexed it to the property. Although it still lies on skids, it is the intent of the installer was for it to remain with the real property. The intent of the installer was for it to perform a function consistent with the real property, single family residence. So even though it doesn't have any attachment whatsoever, it is simply resting on the ground, it is still real property and shall transfer with ownership of the property when it sells. So it's constructively annexed to the real estate and therefore is a fixture.
If I can respond also.
Yes, go ahead.
So the term piers is actually the term used by Nextracker in their instruction manual. They have determined that these are piers, and that's why we use that word. The question of constructive annexation, I mean, sticking with the assets that we're actually talking about here, sure, these are placed in the ground, but, and I think Nate would back me up on this, these piers can be removed without harming the soil or the land. They go straight in, they can come straight out with the same machine. In fact, I believe that if they are not put in a vertical position the way they're designed, that they are removed and reinserted in a vertical position to make sure that the whole trade fixture works together that way. So. And I would also agree that there are certainly things of personal property that are put into buildings that become fixtures. The water heater example, once that's in the building, you don't separately assess that as separate from the building. Air conditioning units. But those examples in no way apply to the way this project is put together.
That cover it, Jeff?
I believe so. I mean, I would make one more comment about federal investment tax credits.
There will be an opportunity to respond.
Okay.
Parties at the
if that question comes up then.
Okay.
So continuing, Mr. Chairman, with the questions that I had for Mark. Mark, you gave the example of, say, like a car wash. Well, with a car wash, say, for example, like a tunnel car wash where there's a fair amount of personal property, you have, property improvements in a building, and then the car wash, like if you use a tunnel car wash, there's, $1 million worth of equipment that's in that car wash. And so that is personal property, and the building, it's the building on the property. This particular facility, there's no building or anything, it's just this equipment on these steel piers. The other thing in your follow-up that you mentioned, like if you had a piece of property with a storage shed and you placed it and you wired it, that it would be part of the real property. But, here in Humboldt County and most places that I'm aware of, I actually have personal property in Mountain View, California that it's a mobile home, a lot, and it's personal property. And that's the way we assess things here. Unless you have a foundation under like one of these things, like a storage shed or a mobile home, that would be personal property. So those, it would still seem to me that this stuff, when you read through these, 361, 11745 and 361, 1127, the petitioner is classifying as trade fixtures. When I was reading these things, they almost looked like to me more as fixtures. I was having trouble distinguishing that, but I'm still a little unsure about that. But
Mr. Chairman, Andy Heis, Humboldt County Assessor for the record. You are correct that mobile homes are classified as personal property here. They are also classified as real property upon a conversion. Sheds of a certain size are classified as real property. So there is a we don't have an individual personal property for a residential home. But when those structures become of such where they are affixed to the land, or the size of it, the sheer size of it, becomes real property. Mobile homes do not need a full foundation. They can have piers with tie downs and still be classified as real property.
If I might address the comments too, is that, if you turn to page 40, there's a question 3 of the Attorney General's opinion. And I think, it might address this. Is the term structure, as used in NRS 361.035, different from a fixture, as that term used in 361.1127? And the conclusion is the term structure and fixture address overlapping items that are similar but not identical. And though they have distinct meanings, it doesn't matter because you're going to value them the same way. So there are structures and erections upon land that we easily identify as buildings. And then there are appurtenances and attachments of land, which is the annexation of equipment and framing and underground wiring and these items that are now have been annexed to the land, and they are fixtures which are distinct from structures and erections upon land, but they're still going to be valued the same way. So I think even though you look at it, you say, well, that's not a building. No, it's not a building, but it is a fixture permanently annexed to the land, designed to operate with the land to the function it was intended. And I get to the point here. It says here, therefore, a structure is always considered real property or real estate, but a fixture does not have to be a structure. So let me see here. Word choice. I think it comes to the conclusion, on page 7, as part of the definition of real property, structure is per se an improvement upon real property. Alternatively, property that's not a structure must be shown to be a fixture to be considered real property. So that, I hope, maybe that helps with that conflict, I guess.
for the record, Mike Shepard, the other thing you touched on, I think, Mark, in your testimony, we're missing something critical in this hearing, the fact that we do not have the agreement between Nevada Lands and Con Ed. And I suppose I would be surprised if Nevada Lands, the owner of this property, is also the owner of all this equipment at the end of this lease agreement. It would just seem illogical to me. It would seem to me that this equipment is presently owned, obviously, by Con Ed, because that's what we're talking about it. They're being taxed on it. It's not owned by Nevada Lands. So that land seems to be distinguishing this stuff. Now, of course, is it a fixture? Is it real property? But still troubled by that, David.
Okay. Any other questions for the assessor side?
Mr. Chairman, Andy Heiser, Humboldt County Assessor. I just want to kind of come back to one other thing is in NAC 361-1117, the cost of replacement. Nowhere in there does it explain or guide my office to make any kind of reduction for a federal tax credit. And nowhere in statute or regulation can we find that. So I just want to make sure we bring that point back up. Mr. Stafford did mention that when he was speaking about that, but there's nowhere in my guidance in law that allows me to make a reduction for a federal tax credit.
And that
Mike,
brings
can I respond to that?
Sure.
I've got a question for him. I appreciate you don't have that, but in what you do, when you guys do your assessments, in the ways you look at things, you recognize income as a component of calculating value. So, and these investments, so in their case, they're saying that you wouldn't build this without the various range of credits. And the ones they have here, the most significant one is a federal investment tax credit because it's huge. The other ones that they had during the course of this project, they had various tax deferrals that were granted by the state of Nevada. So, you know, what they're saying is that their cost takes into account those. You don't have any instructions from the state of Nevada, but, you know, the question is, and I think what they're asserting is that they see their cost at 108 million. If their cost were 155 million, they would not have built it. So it isn't something that's normal, but what is sort of normal in your daily work is if something like a business that would be here in town that isn't rented, goes out of business, or for a range of other reasons, its value is diminished, and this board has done that before, we made an adjustment, as I recall, in the building that was the Star and now is a county building, because it was a casino once, and then it went out of business, and they came and we reduced it because it didn't have its value anymore. You know, so we didn't say, sorry, we can't grant that to you because if you went and built that, if you replaced that building, it would cost you X dollars. So no, we're going to keep the tax the same. We reduced it because it no longer had the income that supported it. So, you know, that's another thing that's confusing about this, I would say, Andy.
another question I have in regards to taxes, and maybe I've missed it or didn't see it. Was there an adjustment made on your part in regards to the sales tax that was paid on the panels? Can you answer that?
I don't know if you want to answer that, Mr. Stafford, but the sales tax on the panels was included. That's as
Yes,
far.
and I referred to that statute in my presentation on page 30, NAC 361-1117. The cost of replacement defined includes sales tax, so we included it in our calculation. Page 30.
Which line is that, Mark?
First statute on the page, NAC 361-1117.
Ah, okay.
At the last sentence.
That's the administrative code, not statute.
That is correct. It's regulation, administrative code.
Okay. So you're paying taxes on, on taxes. Is that,
It-
Right.
It's the replacement cost. Yeah, the replacement cost to construct a property would include sales tax on materials.
that's administrative code. And that, your argument, Jeff, was that that should not be included, right?
I think it's pretty well recognized in Nevada that when you are reporting trade fixtures, personal property, that you exclude sales tax. And generally, I think it's thought that that avoids a double taxation, tax on a sales tax. It's in the personal property manual on page Roman numeral 4.
So am I correct to believe that that only applies to personal taxes though?
If you look at the instructions for reporting improvements, Mr. Shepherd is probably correct. I don't find it in any instructions for reporting improvements that you do not include sales tax, like it specifically says for personal property.
Is there any other questions or anything additional you'd like to add, Andy or Mark? If not,
Could I?
yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. Wendy Maddox, purpose of the record. In regards to your exhibit, we have for respondent exhibit A, are you offering, and that's 48 pages. Are you offering that exhibit at this time, Mr. Heiser?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And Mr. Durant, do you have, other than, I understand you disagree, do you have any objection to their 48 pages in exhibit A?
I have no objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll pass it over to you to entertain a motion for admission of Respondents Exhibit A.
Okay. Did I get a motion to admit or deny? We're trying to put it together here.
I'll make the motion that we accept the responders Exhibit A, 48 pages into our record.
A second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Well, from there, I guess we'll go back and give the petitioner first a chance of rebuttal on what was just presented, if you have any. Or you wanted to say something in regards to, can't remember now, but do you have a rebuttal?
If you give me just 1 second to look at my notes.
Okay.
I would like to say a couple of things, probably just kind of in general, because I think I've been in this situation where the facts and circumstances, help to determine the classification. And sometimes we do get kind of sideways by talking about various examples. Sheds, very heavy machinery sitting on a floor in a building, these things, constructive annexation, things like that, kind of lead us astray from what we're really trying to determine here, which is more the side of the trade fixture issue. I would like to say that I think we have shown that the installation, the placement of these solar arrays and the associated equipment is not permanent. The attachment is not of a nature that it would damage the soil or the personal property. And I think that's pretty determinative of non-permanence. It's not actually always just the manner of attachment. And then with respect to investment tax credits, companies do account for investment tax credits on their balance sheet typically. If they're a rather sizable company, they're going to account for those. I believe Dave has told me that they are accounted as a tax asset, a deferred tax asset. I know that other types of tax credits are specifically allowed in other states, Arizona being one. I know that doesn't apply to you, but it is an example. Prior to 2017, there was a cash grant. The ITC could be turned into a cash grant and you could get your cash right up front. And typically that was accounted for in financial statements as like a deferred revenue and then metered in over the life of the project. So, I mean, I believe there is support. And as far as the statutes not saying anything about adjusting for the investment tax credit, we pointed out that full cash value is really the maximum value. And full cash value, as we stated, is, let's look up the definition here. Full cash value is the most probable price which property would bring in a competitive and open market. And so this project, compared to any other project or potential project, the buyer is going to consider federal investment tax credits. I think that's about all I have to say. Dave or Mr. Grozda?
Yeah, just as a clarification of that last comment you made, Jeff, consideration of the federal tax credits, only the original construction of that project qualifies for that. Any subsequent buyers would be absent that benefit. And so immediately on day two, after the project is constructed, the value of that project has diminished by that 30% immediately. To your point about the cash grant just before, while different than a tax credit in some ways, there are a number of similarities. Both were 30%, both issued by the federal government in support of renewable projects. Those were a reduction rather than over the life of the project, but a reduction off the fixed assets of the project. Cash grant was the exception. ITC is shown on the balance sheet for the projects as a deferred tax asset, as Jeff alluded to. So we do very much consider the ITC as a net reduction of that true cost, and it's so reflected on the balance sheets of each of those businesses and projects. That's all I had. Thank you.
Good. If there's nothing else, I have a question. If to get those tax credits, to get that, that abatement, or no, it wasn't abatement, it was a credit. That was only offered for personal property. It was not offered towards real property. Is that correct? To get the tax credit. It's only
Jeff,
on.
if I could answer that one. I know it's a technical.
Go ahead.
I think you had made that comment. I think the way the federal regulations are such, it's in support of the energy generation. So things like roads, buildings are not eligible for that, which generally fall into those categories, those different categories. But I think that it's not so much a true definition of real versus personal property that I think the federal government looks at, as much as it is that which is engaged in the process of generating electricity in support of renewable energy. Jeff, I defer to you if you had a further.
Yeah, I was going to say that we did touch on that in our brief, which is Exhibit 1, where a quote out of the, let's see. See if I could find the exact what words we said. Page 5 of our exhibit number 1. In further support that this project should be assessed as personal property, trade fixtures, investment tax credits are only allowed on cost of personal property and trade fixtures and not allowed on costs of intangible assets, land, building, organization costs, and real property.
So if we were to disagree with you and agree with the assessor, would it be counter to how you and why you receive these tax credits? Or would it have any determination there? Do you follow my question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The investment tax credit has been settled with the federal government, so that determination has already been made and that credit has been issued. It's a one-time at the beginning of the project, so it's a, you know, at this point that issue is closed and would not be reopened with the federal.
I don't know if I'm making myself clear enough, or I'm not totally getting my answer I want, but the argument for us today is whether or not these are trade fixtures, whether or not this is personal property or real property. Were the tax credits only issued, the tax credits you received issued on only because this was considered personal property or trade fixtures and not real property?
I believe the answer is yes. In other words, the building was not given any federal investment tax credit. The solar arrays were given federal investment tax credit.
Mike Shepard, there are two issues. There's the issue of the trade fixture versus real property. The second issue is the substitution or replacement cost, the value, whether it's what it costs to build it or the net of that, which included the tax credits. So there's two components to your petition. Correct?
That's correct.
Any other questions for the petitioner? If not, I will give the other side, the assessors, also the opportunity to rebut.
I have no further comments.
Any further comments, Andy? So, Wendy, can we now close the evidentiary presentation of this?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what we'll be doing is now closing the evidentiary part of the hearing. I guess there's another opportunity for petitioner to present argument, but
I think that some of the closing arguments sounded like Wendy Maddox, I'm sorry for purpose of the record, but some of the closing arguments sounded like they were addressed in rebuttal or sir rebuttal. So I think I would just ask
move on.
if they'd like to make closing or if they want to submit on the matter.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're going to close this. Is there anything else that you want to add before we close the evidentiary part?
As a petitioner, I believe we've made our case, so we'll close.
Okay. Andy, same? Okay. So closing that, and now we'll move on to the the board's discretion. Allow parties to submit briefs, proposed findings, facts, conclusions. We've done that, right? We don't, is there anything we need to do there?
You can, so essentially, Wendy Maddox, for purposes of the record, the next two kind of items on our County Board of Equalization hearing procedures are, if you would like the parties to submit to you briefs and proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law, or if you are ready to just resolve this as a board and discuss it, you can do so. The other third option is if you want to continue it to a later date so you can come back and discuss it, we can do that as well. So it's totally up to your discretion.
So with that, anything else that we want to ask?
Yes, it's Andy's turn.
Yeah,
Huh?
maybe after we might have.
I'm not following you. What do you mean? So do we, as the board now, what do we want to do here? Does anybody have anything else? Discussion on this?
I just want the one comment, the definition of these, trade fixture versus
Yeah.
real property, whatever. And your comments to start with, anything that we create as a board in a
Motion.
decree as to what we want to say, we better have our ducks in a row, because in more cases than not, it's going to go on to the state board for appeal. So I just think that we have to really consider what we are going to do and make sure that we do it in a legal and proper manner.
And I'm happy to help if, you want to discuss amongst yourself as a board. I'm happy to help if I hear what way you're going and you would like me to, suggest a motion to you based on your discussions. I'm happy to help in that manner.
So are we just determining whether it's a trade fixture or like they had questions about the sales tax issue? Do we have to resolve that as a separate issue? The investment tax credits? Or do we just are determining whether it's a trade fixture or not? Do we have to address all three of their questions?
So your initial question is whether or not they've presented sufficient evidence, because they have the burden of proof, to overturn the assessor's assessment. So you are looking at, three of their points, their arguments. The trade fixture versus fixture, the real property, would be the first one. And depending on which way you decide, that first issue is going to solve, in my opinion, issue number 2, as to how the taxes, if personal property taxes are paid on the panels or not. So depending on how you answer that is going to lead you to an answer on the second part. And then the third part, if you decide that it should be adjusted based on federal tax credits, is the third issue.
Question. I guess Andy has certain regulations that he has to follow for the tax commission. They kind of overrule. And so if he doesn't have any guidance on going ahead and making changes for the tax credits or any other particular thing, and he moves forward by doing that, are we overstepping to support him in something that he's done that the regulations that we have don't permit that?
Essentially, the assessor follows the regulations and statutes. That's his job. And so he has to interpret those and apply the facts and circumstances of each case to that. So, if you agree with that decision, then you would do the same in the absence of any other authority telling you not to do that.
The solar energy production facilities are something new that we're seeing. And I think that regardless of how this case goes today, that it's got to go to the state taxation board to make some clarifications, to make Andy and every assessor's job easier and let them know, how to do their job correctly. So I guess as far as, the definitions here of whether it's a fixture or a trade fixture, I kind of have to lean that it's more along as I read the definitions, it's more along the lines of a fixture. That, it is a necessary part of the improvement. It's designed or committed for use with the land improvement. 3, it's essential to the land or the improvement that the land improvement cannot perform its desired function without the attached. Obviously, without those solar panels and such, that it wouldn't work. It's necessary. I'm open to any other opinions on this. And therefore, as a fixture, it's real property, in other words. It's not clear cut. I mean, you could go either way on this.
Mike Shepard, for the record. As you might sense from the questions and the observations that I've had here, I just don't see all of this equipment as real property. It seems reasonable to me in the context of the reasonable person that, this is not permanently attached because it has the pier that's a steel post that can be pulled out and reused. So to me, the distinction between the trade fixture and the fixture that they have in there, when I read through those, I have trouble sorting that out. But it just seems to me that it's not part of the real property. The other issue about, the assessed value of the 108, taking into account the investment tax credit, when appraisers do things, they work through cost, tax capitalization. I think that's a term that can be used. If there's a tax on real property or anything like that, that has to be accounted for in the value, because in any type of property that the revenue is the issue, as is the case here, as is the case in a rental building, all of your costs accrue against your revenue, and the revenue that is net is a basis for determining the value. And so taxes have to be capitalized, negatively, like any cost. And in this case, it's sort of the reverse. It's like a positive thing. The fact that they have the investment tax credit reduced their capital investment. And, I agree with the petitioner on those points. What troubles me is I just don't have the legal expertise to digest the other underlying things in the NAC that give the assessor direction. That's what troubles me, that some of it seems contrary to how I see this. Your turn, Jim.
And I agree with you in the fact that, you're reading some of the definitions and it's, NRS is saying one thing and the interpretation is something totally different. So it's, the fixture versus trade fixture versus whatever, and I'm of the belief that these are trade fixtures. Yeah. When I first read through it about 3 times, I figured, God, they stuck a post. For one thing, I thought that they were in concrete, and then the more I read about it, the more I found out they aren't. But, they're going to be there for 30 years. And if somebody buys up a lease and it continues, it's going to be there for another umpteen years. So if, whether it's a fixture or a trade fixture, flip a coin.
It's a matter of where you're at. If I was, it's a matter of where you're at. This is Gary Bingachia. If I was in business and I was putting this solar units in, I would look at it one way. Sitting here, they made a good presentation, and the question I guess I have is, we have the regulations, and it's just not clear cut. And I'm not sure that we as a board here can make a determination without going back to the state and having them. I think with the solar units going in, and there's going to be more of them probably going in, I think the state needs to step up, and they're going to have to make some regulations that the assessors and that we can follow.
Mike Shepard, probably they're going to use what we do here, right or wrong, as a basis for that. If we do something here, then it can be tested.
That's process.
The fact remains that the property owner is a separate entity from the petitioner here. If the property owner and the petitioner were the same entity, it would make it easier to favor the assessor's position that it's all part of the real estate. But it just isn't reasonable to Nevada lands that had these large parcels of what I believe was ag ground, that the petitioners are going to put this stuff on there and give it to them at the end of a term. It's just not reasonable that it's part of the real estate. It's only reasonable to me that all of this equipment belongs to the petitioner, whatever they intend to do with it. And we don't have their lease, so we don't have any clear-cut information that says they're just going to walk away and give it to the owner that used to have a piece of ag dirt. Now he's got a fortune in steel and solar panels. That we don't know that. It's not been presented. We don't have anything in front of us. But it isn't reasonable to me that that's the case. It isn't reasonable to me that Nevada lands would say, we'll have this lease, you go away, we don't care what you do. That's not reasonable to me. Having seen numerous leases over my life, it's not reasonable to me. And, I maintain, as I've questioned and stated, that, the petitioner's valuation is the net of their investment because they have investment tax credit. And it is known to us because it's public information that virtually everything done that is solar is supported by the federal government. Up at our school here, our high school, we got all of these solar panels supported by shade structures that they park under. It isn't reasonable to me that the school board woke up one day and said, it would sure be nice if the cars weren't getting hot. Why don't we just build some shade structures so we can park under them? I don't know the particulars of the funding, but I do know, having been involved in solar facilities, such as up at the hospital, that on the hospital, where I had a direct involvement with the solar panels that are on the two-story structure and the solar panels that are on the acute, there were credits that went to a company that applied to the hospital. The hospital didn't get the credits. And I know that the production of those panels will not pay what we invested in them. It's something that people felt was a good thing to do. So, you know, I stand with the petitioner on their assessed value that they believe takes into account these credits. The points that Mark makes, because he has his expertise is in the realm of the NAC and the NRS and the way I can't take issue with what Mark presents because he knows the law better than I do. So I guess it's left with us. Are we brave enough to make a decision here today based on what we've heard? Or do we need to have more input at another meeting? And I guess the trouble with that is, if we get twice as much of the same thing, are we going to know any better?
Yeah, I agree. And Wendy, so do we have the latitude to pick it apart?
Absolutely.
Agree, no? Yes?
No, you do, absolutely.
Okay.
I get where Wendy Maddox, purpose of the record, I get where you're going. This may kind of be new territory, and it would be nice if the state would step in and really give some guidance, but it's up to you. Whichever way you decide, just make findings. I mean, and you're all talking about them in your discussion. You're making findings when you're talking about a fixture, and you're making findings when you're talking about a trade fixture. So I think that just discuss it and somebody make a motion and include those findings, and I'm happy to help if you need some help.
So I agree with Mr. Shepherd as far as the investment tax credit. I don't believe, and you stated this, I don't think the facility would have been built without it. And so I don't know that it should be included in that value. The other thing I struggle with is, okay, we can call it a temporary facility, I guess. That's kind of what they're alluding to. 30 years to me is not temporary. I mean, yeah, there's going to be panels like the panels. There's going to be some that will wear out and maybe need to be replaced. But if it was a building and it was an air conditioner, it would wear out and you'd have to replace it in 20 years too, or whatever.
Roof.
You know? Yeah.
Whatever.
Roof, whatever. So as far as, I still see it as, in my opinion, as real property versus personal property, because it's 30 years to me, and I don't see it going away in 30 years unless we don't know what's going to be the new energy source in 30 years, but it was built to be there a while, and as it's going to improve, yeah, the technology is going to improve, but I don't see the facility going away.
And updates, if they have to change panels and stuff, the development of new panels, they're going to last longer and so forth. They're going to go in.
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess if it was going to be 30 years, I would have liked to have seen a plan of recognition right now of what was going to happen. But, you know, hopefully it's successful and it lasts for a long, long, long time, past 30 years.
And I agree also with Mr. Shepherd that it would have been nice to see the lease and what the termination clauses are in that, as far as how they have to respond, you know, when a mine has to reclaim, you know, a site. Do they or don't they? We haven't seen that one way or the other.
Mining's a little bit different in the sense that you're putting a lot of assets and stuff in the ground too, that after they pull out all the ore, something has to be done to protect the environment, protect the people. Where in this situation, when things are removed, there is a way to put it back to pretty much normalcy. Just go back in and reseed it, level it up maybe, or reseed it and hope for good rains.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we accept the petitioner's assessed value of $108,349,133 based upon the petitioner's Exhibit A,
I think that's 180 million.
pardon?
Mr. Shepherd, I know they have their own exhibits on their labelings, but the petitioners are the numeric ones. Those are the ones that are in the exhibit list and part of the official record.
Would
Should
that,
be in
that would be our petitioner's Exhibit 2, I think you're referring to, Mike?
I think so.
Oh,
It's in the I-5 section.
so it would be what we adapted that they didn't call out because, see, they had noted exhibit, but what we did is there's the respondent. See, and I'm just behind their,
You're referring to not one, because that's.
nope, I'll show you what
that's
I'm,
the next one,
let me show you what I'm referring to.
because these are the
And-
ones with the actual exhibit numbers on them.
Yeah, that's where we have a problem, see, because we didn't have this as an exhibit.
Right.
And so what we did is made a motion to incorporate these pages, correct?
No, you did not. That
We
was
didn't?
not added as an exhibit.
Okay,
Mr. Durant indicated it was not required as an exhibit, so
Okay.
he did not.
so then what this is a
Petitioner-
component of their petition.
It's kind of the pretty.
And then they admitted it.
I
as
think what you're
exhibits
referring to
Yes.
is behind I-4.
Yeah.
Exhibit 2, I think is what you're referring to.
I think it's this.
There we go.
Yeah,
Then
it's 5.
It's the
To
same thing.
to rephrase that then would be petitioner's Exhibit 2. Now, is that too confounded to work?
No, got it. You have your findings on that?
Are my findings something that's written here or the reasonable person?
Your findings are on page 30 of the respondent exhibit where the statutes are.
Okay. No, I don't think they are. Because that exhibit of the two components of this are the investment tax credit and the definition of fixture versus real property. Let me look back again at this. You could have done this, Jim, and saved me from looking bad.
Should have tagged it.
Are you looking for the definition of trade
I'm
fixture?
going back to exec.
Trade fixtures.
Okay, I'm on, I got to go back to petitioner's Exhibit 2.
Can we break this out and have
It's-
motions, one in regards to the,
Absolutely. However
would rather
you're
do
comfortable.
That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to deal with the investment tax credit, and I
Okay.
might have the wrong references.
oh, okay.
And this, because what I'm referencing here, the big distinction is the trade fixture issue. So my reference is wrong for the investment tax credit issue. So
Page 3.
let's see.
It's What page are you looking at, Mike?
Well, this Exhibit 2 deals with the trade fixtures and like Ron said, if we take it apart in pieces, the issue of the investment tax credit and its relationship to the value.
That's where we were talking about, they received the tax credit on trade fixtures and personal property, but not on real property.
Yes, so,
Is that what you're looking for?
yes. So I might have the wrong exhibit here.
I think it's just a couple of,
So like, what I should be referring to as Exhibit 4. So before I rephrase that motion, let's make sure I have that right. If I'm looking at Exhibit 4, which has 2 pages, and on the second page is the column that tallies the investment tax credit and brings that calculation over to the 108, 349.
Yeah.
That looks like. So Tammy, let me just rephrase it maybe so it's straight. So I would move that we accept the petitioner's request to account the investment tax credit against the total value. So from the 153, 984, 442, crediting 45, 635, 309 to derive the 108, 349, 133. So that would be, the finding would be page 1 and 2 of petitioner's Exhibit 4.
What's, Wendy Maddox, what's the why as to that?
What's the what?
The why? Are you saying that it's personal property?
What? No, I'm saying that the total value would be based upon the petitioner's value, which takes into account the tax credit less than the actual money expended.
Thank you.
Why.
I'll second that.
a motion has been made and seconded. Is there further discussion? I have, I guess, a little bit here. So if we go with this, if we were to pass this motion, then it basically, as far as whether it's personal or real property, accepting this, we are saying it's personal property or trade.
We're not because the tax credit is not issued on personal. It's issued on personal property.
On trade fixtures and personal property, it looks like.
No, these are all trade fixtures. You know, well, there's still that question out there, I guess, but see, all of these things that they're calling trade fixtures is what these tax credits are on.
Mm-hmm.
They're not on the office building.
No.
And they're not on the water and the trenching and other things. They're on all of the other items. So that relates to the total value of the property. It's the way I'm understanding.
Well, and the taxation going forward, whether it's taxed as real property going forward or personal property.
Yeah, it doesn't take that into account. We haven't dealt with that, right?
But will.
You're essentially just making a motion on their third point in regard to the tax credit
That's correct.
and haven't addressed the other two issues yet.
That's correct.
But Wendy, it says, if we use this exhibit, it says that solar panels are trade fixtures or personal property.
Yeah, I don't know about the exhibit as far as, I don't think that you need to make that determination and of real property or personal property to be able to make a decision on the tax credit.
Yeah, for the purpose of this particular motion.
Okay, I don't know if it doesn't, I'm not
Mr.
clear.
Chairman, as a point of clarification,
Yes,
I believe, and the petitioner could certainly verify this, but his requested value would have included removing the sales tax due to his claim that they should be treated as personal property, AKA trade fixtures. So his value would have also removed the personal property, would have also removed the sales tax as well. In addition to the tax credits. And he can clarify that.
Can't.
Yeah.
Would you like me to respond?
please. You can use all the help we, yeah, take care.
So say the question again, just to make sure I respond the right way.
What is my question?
Yes, about the exhibit?
The exhibit said, in the exhibit, exhibit 4, pages 1 and 2, we have across here what taxpayer cost, investment credit, and taxpayer replacement value. And then on a separate column, taxpayer classification. So I guess that's only the taxpayer's classification, not necessarily the legal classification. Can we look at it that way?
Question.
So this exhibit is like 3 steps. And each step has to do with the issues we raised. The first step, as you move from page 1, is the deduction of the sales tax, $1,042,000. Then the second step on page 2 is the adjustment for federal income tax, which has a total adjustment of $45,635,309. So that's the value of that one issue. The third issue is taxpayer classification, the very last column.
Yeah.
So we're trying to deal with one issue, and the finding exhibit wraps them all in one.
Yeah.
So it makes the finding a challenge and makes our action questionable, I guess.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
If the board were to go piecemeal through the motions, like for instance, not taking into account the specific exhibit with numbers, if they were to make a motion that the taxpayer has presented sufficient evidence and to meet their burden in regards to the tax credit, can they instruct you to remove that portion and to recalculate the numbers? Or do they have to state numbers today?
Mark, I don't know if you want to respond, but Andy Heiser, for the record, I would assume that the board would need to clarify which assets or which direct costs would receive that credit and which ones would not, and the values of those. If we're just talking to the credits alone.
The federal tax credit alone?
Did we lose Mark?
No,
Yeah, I can't answer that question. That's, that exhibit is prepared by the petitioner, so I really can't address it.
Mike Shepard, more specifically, what the motion attempts to address is the third column of page 2, petitioner's exhibit 4. Simply that, simply the tax credits on those horizontal line items notwithstanding the discussion about the fifth column. Simply that column and that issue of whether or not the investment tax credit is determinant in the issue of value as opposed to the actual cost of construction. Is that a flawed finding?
Oh, and you're speaking about Wendy Maddox purpose of record. You're speaking specifically about the 45,635,309?
That is correct.
Perfect, understood. Thank you.
Okay. What about the sales tax on the solar panels?
Separate issue for a separate motion.
But isn't that how, with that removed as well, is how they came up with 108 million?
Yes.
So it has to be part of it, no?
No, it sounds like Mr. Shepherd is making a motion just based on the investment tax credit, which is on that exhibit, page 2 of that exhibit 4, in the amount of 45,635,309. Is my understanding.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, we do have the motion in a second. And any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. To take the taxpayers' replacement value. Now, do we want to tackle the fixture or trade fixture portion of this? Do we have to, Wendy, or can we leave that at
You have to. Do we want to take a break or are we good?
Jesus.
Okay.
As far as, I guess I'll lead off if we're going to take this on as well. I still believe that by definition, NRS, NACs, that it fits more within the fixture side of things, making it real property versus trade fixture. That's my opinion.
And I agree with that.
Okay. Any opinions or any other discussion from anybody on this?
We've beat it to death.
Okay.
Make a motion.
Somebody make a motion then.
We want to talk about that a little.
Any other discussion? Not,
I didn't hear the motion. I'm sorry.
huh?
I didn't hear the motion. I'm sorry.
We haven't had one yet.
Oh,
Made one.
I thought somebody said one. I'm
Everybody's
sorry.
thinking it's going.
So based on the discussions, though, if you're going to make a motion, if you're going to go with fixture, your motion would be motion taxpayer has presented insufficient evidence to overturn the assessor's assessment based upon a finding that the project generating facility and equipment should be classified as a fixture pursuant to 361.1127. And I think earlier you made some language in regards to the adaptation test, which is specifically 1B, the use or purpose of an item that is not otherwise physically annexed to land or an improvement is so adapted that it is a necessary, integral, or working part of the land or improvement, designed or committed for use of the land or improvement, or so essential to the land or improvement that the land or improvement cannot perform its desired function without the non-attached item. And then you'd also include, if you went with that, what Mr. Stafford indicated in regard to the reasonable person, the intent that ownership of the item would be conveyed with a transfer of real property. If someone were to buy a solar generating facility, they would buy it they would convey it as it is. So that would be my suggestion if you're going to go with fixture. If you'd like a sample motion for a trade fixture, happy to give you one of those as well.
I want somebody to make the motion that I probably will oppose, then we can get this done.
Okay, can somebody just say, I'll make that a motion?
That's the problem is I wouldn't mind making it, but I just don't know the verbiage that should be used to.
Just use her.
That's what I was
Say,
looking
I'll
for.
make that motion.
I'll make the motion that we convert it to your verbiage.
Did you get everything I said?
I did not, but I guess I'll listen to the recording. I
Okay.
type fast, but not that fast.
Which essentially opposes the petitioner.
You've essentially made a motion that the taxpayer has presented insufficient evidence to meet their burden to overturn the assessor's assessment based upon the finding that it's a fixture as defined in NRS 361, I'm sorry, not NRS, NAC 361.1127, 1B and 2.
Mr. Bedart made the motion. Do I have a second?
I make that motion.
I'll second it.
Board Member Stone seconded it. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
So let the record show that Board Member Shepherd voted nay. What else do we have to do? Wendy, did we cover everything or?
You've essentially with this motion, you've covered the other two issues that were raised by the petitioner. So I think that's sufficient.
Okay. So I guess we're done with that then. Not really, but kinda.
Andy's just starting with it.
Yeah.
So is there, item 7 says discussion and possible action on scheduling Board of Equalization hearing, appeal hearing and additional meetings as required. We don't have any, do we? Or do you, Andy?
You will have to meet to approve the minutes. Previously, the date at the organizational meeting, you discussed the March 4th date at like 8:30. I believe it was Commissioner Cherry that voiced that he may have a conflict. But I will say it's going to take me a few days to create these minutes.
Yeah.
I think I'm traveling on the 4th. 4th is a Friday, that guy.
Yeah.
That is a Friday. We could do, we have sufficient time to agendize for Thursday.
3rd?
3rd.
What dates you talking?
That would be a Thursday. I know that Mr. Pingachi is not available on Wednesdays. So Thursday the 3rd, we don't have time to agendize for the 1st, I don't believe, do we?
I'm not here the 1st and the 2nd. I'm here the 3rd, so.
The 3rd then would probably be the best if the 4th is.
That'll work.
It shouldn't take long. It'll just be a matter of approving the minutes so that they can go to the state if this is appealed up.
Could be done virtually as well, huh?
Yep.
Yes, we'll have a Teams meeting just as we did for this.
Looking at March 3rd.
Is that okay with everybody, March 3rd?
Yep.
It's a Thursday at 8:30.
Yeah, be good, 30.
Looks good.
Okay. So if that's it on that, we'll go back to public comment. Is there any public comment? Hearing none, meeting is adjourned. Thanks everyone for joining us, either both here and there online, so appreciate it. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, guys.
Good day.
Thank you all.